Okay, maybe that's better. Can you hear me now? Can everybody hear me now? You know what? I just hadn't installed a microphone in the other screen. Good to see everybody coming to you from Chautauqua, New York. Just a quick sound check. Can I get a sound check? If you would, KB, can you hear me well enough? Fantastic. Okay, sorry to nerd out on you there. Okay, welcome back to class. I hope everybody had a good July 4th. Did you folks blow up some fireworks this weekend? Have some fun? I hope so. I hope you did it in a socially responsible way and stayed away from everybody else, right? Sounded like I was in a war zone this weekend. I think from about 6 to about 2 a.m. we had just explosion after explosion. It was it was pretty riveting all night. All right, so here we are to week 6, and I want to go ahead and congratulate the week 5 Kahoot winners. Zara at the top. I got Abir bringing up a close second and Donnie in third place. We had more people play this week than last week, so thank you very much. We'll have week 6 Kahoot up Friday morning. I want to see if we can change the leaderboard again. It's good to see all you folks. I got Erica in the classroom. We got Ashley. Hi, Travis. Renee, Madison Fitz. And I don't know if we have Madison G on here. And as always, Ken Hoyle. Good to see you folks. So this week we're going to be talking about chapters 10 and 11. Today I'm going to be talking about chapter 10, which is sex and gender. And so here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the difference between primary and secondary sex characteristics and how sexuality develops as we mature into adulthood. We're then going to talk about inconsistencies in biological sex. A lot of times we think of biological sex as being a dichotomy, either you're a male or a female. But I'm going to try to suggest to you that maybe the story is a little more complex than that. And it is actually the interplay between genes and hormones at the right time in the body. And then we're going to talk a little bit about gender identity and how that might relate to our sexuality. Okay, am I frozen for everybody? Did the screen freeze? If it did, please send me a text. Hello? No, okay. It's just you, Erica. User error, so you have to figure that one out. I can't help you there. Okay, fantastic. How about that? Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about sex. Now, the thing is, a lot of times people say that, you're born male or female, and it's all a matter of the chromosomes. Either you're an XX or you're an XY. And that's part of the case. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But what exactly do the XX and the XY chromosome represent? What do they cause to happen? All right. So it's not just how are they expressed. How is this genotype expressed to give us the phenotypes that we see as male and female? So your book's going to talk about sex chromosomes, and it's even got a karyotype on page 380. And a karyotype is basically just a picture of a person's chromosomes. You'll notice that there are 23 pairs of chromosomes. Each one of these chromosomes is a copy of your genetic information from your mom and one from your father. The first 22 pairs of chromosomes are what we call autosomes. All right, they're the same for men and the same for women. Right? But the 23rd pair is going to be a little bit different. So, if you, with the 23rd pair, the chromosomes are going to, for females, you're going to see the typical 2 X chromosomes that you'll see in the other 21 autosomes. It'll look like this. And then the male pair of chromosomes will have an X, and then it'll have I can't even make a Y chromosome. So you'll have an X and a Y chromosomes. And these represent the genetic basis of of sexuality. And what these chromosomes are going to do is they're going to have different genes that express, that help you express sexuality. Specifically on the Y chromosome, there's a little spot called the SRY gene. What is it called? The sex determining region on the Y chromosome. All right. Now, it turns out that we're all born with gonads, two gonads in our abdomen. Or excuse me, I take that back. When we begin developing, we develop two gonads, and those will be our sexual reproductive glands. And remember, they're going to secrete hormones, which work via the endocrine system, right? Remember, hormones are like neurotransmitters, but they act systemically. So we're going to have these gonads during the first 2 to 8 weeks when we begin organogenesis. Remember that from chapter 4. Now, around the 6th or 7th week, if you have the Y chromosome, this SRY gene is going to cause you to get a burst of, it causes the it gives a chemical instructions that causes the gonads, the male and the male gonads, to turn into testes. So we actually all start out with these gonads. For the females, they don't change per se. Whereas for the males, the SRI gene causes the ovary, these gonads, to turn into testes and begin producing androgens. Androgens are male hormones. The most famous one you've probably heard is testosterone. And for females, you have estrogen. And the most common one they talk about is estradiol. Right now, so these ovaries and testes are going to produce androgens and estrogens. But around puberty, what's going to happen is for the males, the androgen, specifically testosterone production, is going to shoot up by, I think your book says, over 20 times the level of before puberty. So for males, the testosterone level is going to shoot way up. And for females, estradiol levels during puberty are also going to increase. Not as much as males. They're going to increase by 8 times their original level. Now, males and females are still both producing testosterone, androgens, and estrogens, but the males are just going to produce way more androgens than the females, and the females are going to produce more estrogens. This is going to lead to the development of the maturing of the primary sex characteristics and the maturing of secondary sex characteristics. In your book, they're going to talk about primary sex characteristics as whether or not you have testes or ovaries, whether or not you have a penis or a vagina. These are your sex characteristics that are related to reproduction. Right? The puberty, the hormone bump that you get in puberty, is going to cause the gonads and the testes and the ovaries to mature, and the penis and the vagina to mature, and then they're going to begin producing the sex cells. Men's are going to know that they're producing these sex cells when seminarche happens, which is their first wet dream or nocturnal emission. And for females, you're going to know that they have hit this bump when they have their first menstrual period, which is known as menarche. Now, at the same time that these primary characteristics are going to mature, we're also going to see the appearance of sexual secondary characteristics. Secondary characteristics are sex characteristics that differentiate the male and female form, but are not specifically related to sexual reproduction, such as facial hair on the men and on the hair on the chest, the changing shape of men and women, where the females get the wider hips and the breasts grow, and the men get the broader shoulders and the hips narrow. So those are all going to be hormone-related changes that differentiate between the sex, and they're going to show you the males versus the females. Now, here's the thing, though. And I have to admit, I was guilty of this at one time too, thinking that, when you have that gene, that means that you're going to be a male, or if you have that XX pair, you're going to automatically be a female. But those genes, remember, genes just express themselves by creating proteins, which cause things to happen. So there's a link between the gene and the final, what we would call phenotype. And so anything can go wrong but be different between the genotype and the expression of the phenotype that can cause you to not develop part or all of your primary and secondary sexual characteristics. So really, you can think of sex as being sort of on a continuum. Yes, we have prototypical males, cisgender males, and we have prototypical females, cisgender females. But these hormones and the way they're expressed prenatally, and especially we're going to talk about prenatal expression of these genes, is going to affect the final combination of primary and secondary sexual characteristics that you'll see in males and females. And so your book's going to talk about some ways in which genetic differences or hormone differences cause people to turn out in ways that don't represent these prototypical ends of the spectrum. So I don't know if any of you have heard of Turner syndrome, but females with Turner syndrome are actually born missing one of their 23rd chromosome pairs. And this leads to the lack of development of the ovaries and really low levels of estrogen in females. Typically, if you see a female under 5 foot, they commonly have this particular disorder. Turner syndrome is also associated with lower than average IQ levels. And so this is what happens. Sometimes a chromosome is missing and its instructions can't be expressed if it's missing. On the other hand, sometimes a genetic female will have more exposure to androgens in utero. So when the body begins producing, when the developing fetus begins producing these androgens, this XX genetic female will get too much. Will get too much androgens, and this leads to genitals which don't differentiate themselves between male and female organs. So their primary sex characteristics don't differentiate. Good morning. It's good to see you, Amber. I'm glad you're here. I'm just fighting through a lecture on biological sex, trying to suggest that maybe it's not as simple as just an X and a Y chromosome. Now, you know what? There are some XY genetic males who just because of a genetic mutation, they don't respond to testosterone level that are released by the testes starting in the 6th or 7th week of gestation. And so their primary male sex characteristics may not develop, so they're not going to develop the testes and the penis. All right, and so these are ways in which you can have you can have a set of genetic instructions, but because it's a cascade of hormones at appropriate times, sometimes if these hormones, because of genetic mutations, aren't expressed at the proper time and in the proper amount, we get people who don't necessarily fit into the prototypical male or female dichotomy. And in fact, your book's even going to talk about that in the next part of the book. So if you think about it, not only do these hormones cause you, if you will, to look differently, your primary and secondary sex characteristics, but you can also think of maybe males and females as having different feelings. So these hormones also create, in a sense, a female of an idea, a feeling of maleness or femaleness too. Just like you've got secondary sexual characteristics that you can't see, you can think of secondary characteristics that make you feel male or feel female. Now, for the most part, in a dichotomous world where everybody's assumed to be cisgender male or female, we go through a great deal of gender role socialization that sort of tells us what it is we like, what it is we don't like, and what it is to be male and female. And a lot of times we learn these roles using models that was described in your behavioral chapter, in chapter 5. So we do learn by watching others and copying others. So you watch your mom or your dad engage in these gender roles and you copy them. And then we also do reward people for holding what we consider to be appropriate gender roles. Now, back in my day, if you were a young boy and you wore something pink, you were punished for that quite harshly. It's not the case today, but Ken, you can probably speak to this. Back in the early 80s and late 70s, if you were a boy, you just couldn't wear that because that sort of was not seen as a boy thing. And a lot of times we tend to have expectations about job roles that people do. For example, I've heard people that say president is a male thing, and they don't actually even sort of think of it as being something that a female can do. Or our society may think of doctors or scientists as male rather than female. And so these are expectations that society puts on us that don't necessarily represent our sexuality. However, each and every one of us, not only do we have society telling us who to be, but we also have a sense of identity, if you will. And those are like I said, the thoughts and the feelings, kind of like the secondary characteristics that may be created by chemicals coursing in your brain that make you feel like you're either a male or a female. And this is when we talk about people who identify. So I may identify this way, and it may agree with my biological gender, but it may also not agree with my biological gender. Now, as I suggested before, it's not just as simple as your X and Y chromosome, all right? Because sometimes people are born with these chromosome abnormalities that make primary characteristics grow, not grow, or whatnot. And these same sort of genetic mutations can also cause in people feelings, what you might call identity feelings that either match or don't match with the gender, with the sex that they are. And so your book's going to talk a little bit about gender identity. And I learned this term several years ago. I had cisgender. And this is a term we usually use to refer to people who are prototypical in their sexual expression. So the male who also feels like a male. Hold on, let me stop and respond to KB's point. Real men wear pink. Back then you would have been called a preppy person. Bold colors were very trendy set, but not the norm. Absolutely. That's a good point. Now you're brave and cool and stylish. Not so much back in the 70s, right? And so we have cisgenders. Now, your book's got sort of this dichotomy, this 2x2 here on the in the textbook that I've got on the screen that sort of shows you how to relate these terms. And so we typically talk about transgender people as being those whose mind does not match up with their biological sex. Just like you can be a male and have some primary male sex characteristics and some female secondary sex characteristics, or you can be primarily female and have some male primary or secondary sex characteristics. You can have male primary sex characteristics, and you can have thoughts that make you feel like you are either a male or a female. And so a transgender is when a person's mental sex doesn't jive with their biological sex. Your book talks about gender queer, and we typically talk about these people that don't identify with either sex. And then your book's going to talk about androgynous as referring to people who identify as both a male and a female. Now, you'll notice underneath that I talk about gender dysphoria. Now, gender dysphoria would be different than these other terms because gender dysphoria would represent a condition or a situation in which you didn't feel, in which this lack of correlation bothered you or caused problems. Sexuality is a weird thing that is governed by cultural beliefs and cultural taboos. And in fact, until 1973, homosexuality was actually considered a form of psychological illness and was listed in the Handbook of Psychological Illness. So it's really difficult for society sort of to come to grips of what it means not to be cisgender, not to fit into these cultural categories that we have, right? Now, what we've got here is this term gender dysphoria, and this refers to people when this situation causes them a great amount of stress and distress. So typically the hallmark of any psychological disorder is that it bothers you. If you're a sad person and you like feeling sad, then is it really depression? If you're highly energetic and have a strong personality and everybody likes you, does that mean you're a narcissist, right? So we typically talk about the difference between situations that cause distress and those that don't cause distress. And so there are some people for whom maybe not being cis provides some form of distress. And so gender dysphoria is a term that we use for those people. Okay, so here's the deal. What I want you to know from this lecture is I want you to know the difference between primary and secondary sex characteristics and how genes work through hormones called androgens and androgens and estrogens to create what we call the mature sexuality. Sexual maturity tends to occur in the teenage year, or does occur in the teenage years. We call this puberty, and there are terms, spermarch and menarche, that I want you to be familiar with that represent sexual maturity. And then I want you to be familiar with three ways in which sometimes this process doesn't work in the prototypical manner, right? And I want you to understand that should allow us or cause us to think about sexuality as being something on a continuum rather than a dichotomy. Okay? And then I want you to be familiar with the terms of gender roles socialization, and I want you to think of sex as also being in the mind. Not only is it a primary sex characteristic, not only is it secondary physical sex characteristics, but it's also a mental construct, a way you think. And that there are some people who don't necessarily have a correlation between their biological sex and their gender identity. Do you have any questions for me? Cool. I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. I'm going to be up here in New York for the next 2 weeks streaming. My little classroom might look a little bit different for the next couple of weeks, and I might have new bugs to work out. If y'all don't have any questions for me, I'm going to let you go. The homework will be available by tomorrow morning for you to start, and the Chapter 10B PowerPoint presentation will be available. Okay? Take care. It's good to see everybody, and until tomorrow, take care.